In what ways does your media product use, develop, or challenge forms and conventions of real media products? When creating my product, I envisioned a film which would both belong within the horror genre, but develop and challenge the typical horror formula, which has become so typical within Hollywood. Two of the most exciting, successful modern horrors, The Conjuring and It Follows, link with my own plan, and they prove an essential role in the eventual influences found within my own product. The plot of my product revolves around mystery and tension through uncertainty, an element both The Conjuring and particularly It Follows capitalises on. To stand apart from the modern stale conception of horror, which relies upon jump scares, I instead chose to focus on tension and suspense for delayed horror gratification, a precedent set within well-made genre classics such as The Shining and Alien. The current climate of Hollywood, the well-made horror is a genre in resurgence, evident in the global success of Get Out and It, which finds itself as the highest-grossing horror film of all time. This is a trend I wish to replicate within my own product. The plot is shared between two simultaneous storylines, with the main character, the villain, being present in both. I believe the effect of the two separate portrayals of the villain added a more dimensional approach to the character, while also stressing the sadistic and cruel nature of him to re-watch the murders he has committed. I purposefully minimalised the information surrounding the character to create as much suspense as possible, and at the end of the opening, leaves the audience open to interpret what will occur next. The victims evident in the extract correspond to the typical horror character role of dislikable dominant male bullies. It similarly places the dominating bullies in a position of weakness, to juxtapose traditional conceptions of strength and to provide the gratification of the deflating of a person in a position of authority, and the reinforcing of the belief in justice. While the bullies transition from a position of hunter to prey, a contrasting change happens in the villain, who appears originally a victim, but at the end is clearly not. The non-binary roles of the characters provide a change to the typical formula and aids in the establishment of the uncertainty. In terms of micro-elements, my product similarly conforms and develops elements of horror. For example, the first-person perspective of half of my product creates intimacy and verisimilitude, contrasting the other half shot traditionally, setting apart the two strands of the storyline on the visual perspective outside of the lighting and location difference. The effect of the first-person perspective is to place the viewer within the role of the victim, and cause them to better empathise with the events occurring on screen. This is a theme conformed to within my own work. This technique of found footage came to popularity when it was the defining aspect of the successful Blair Witch Project, a film that revolves around suspense but likeable to my own. The later sequences shot traditionally revolve around lighting to build suspense and use deliberate camera angles to develop uncertainty and introduce a sense of dramatic irony. The masked man lying below the bed is visible only to the viewer. They know he is there, but the protagonist does not. This develops typical horror conventions, as the viewer is supposed to naturally view the events occurring on screen from the perspective of the protagonist, but I believe this implication added an eerie sense and foreboding atmosphere. Further, the fourth wall is broken when the masked man stares directly at the camera and holds his finger to his mouth. How does your media product represent particular social groups? Within the product, there are two distinct social groups presented: dominant masculine characters and the contrasting societal loser. The bully's position within the hierarchy is dictated by their expensive clothes and confident voices and aggressive personalities, while the loser appears in cheaper, unfashionable clothes and is submissive and introverted in comparison. To avoid needless exposition for characters who will receive minimal screen time, it makes sense to stick to stereotypes to provide characterization and minimal impact to the plot. This was something I attempted to conform to for the role of the bullies. Neither of the two roles are desirable, and both are purposely made unattractive to justify the fates of all three of the characters we see in the opening: the murder of two and the presumed death of another. The murderer blends roles. He moves from victim to predator, a transition which often occurs in horror films which you view from the perspective of the killer, e.g. Carrie. Much of my own product is similarly presented through the eyes of the murderer. While the representation of social groups is limited, the depth of the murderer reveals a multifaceted character who is both loser/victim and also dominant/predator. The fluidity of the villain proved one of the key elements of creating mystery, and is key in any film to provide an antagonist of interest. What kind of media institution might distribute your film, and why? Preferably for my film, I would use a major studio with experience within the horror genre to distribute my product. New Line Cinema is both a prolific studio in its own right, known for both its financial and critical success of its products. Its experience with horror films extends to long-running franchises such as the Nightmare on Elm Street and Final Destination franchises, as well as the contemporary successes such as It and The Conjuring. Their experience in the genre would allow for the most effective methods of both marketing and distribution, as they have such a wide-scale network. Who would be the audience for your media product? The film is aimed towards an audience of teenagers to young adults. The violence and physical confrontation between male characters makes it a film aimed towards a mostly male demographic. Further, all the characters and perspectives in the opening are male. Psychographically, the film will be marketed along the lines of a well-made horror, so it will provide entertainment for all audiences, as it's aimed towards intellectual groups who will appreciate modern changing horror. Also, the psychological horror elements often revolve around uncertainty and suspense, something driven by mystery and curiosity, so it will likely find more triumph with an educated audience. Horror films such as The Conjuring typically cash into a repetitive audience of horrorgoers who consistently view the products. Horror films rarely transcend this but are capable of huge profit when they attract non-typical horrorgoers, such as it was evident in It, which grossed upwards of $700 million. The primary gratifications within my product are to see figures of authority get deflated, to experience in a guilt-free situation extreme emotions, to reinforce belief in justice, to experience the ugly, and to see villains in action. How do you address your audience? The principal audience of my product being young people, the characters themselves represent this, as the situations and elements of the product are based around their appeal towards a young demographic. Issues such as bullying provide a relatable aspect to young people watching. The focus on young characters within horror is also a narrative device, as they are frequently regarded vulnerable and weak, promoting their role of victim. Childhood or young adulthood is also a stage most people can relate to and proves a nostalgic point. A young cast of characters and relating problems can be seen within most horror films, such as It and It Follows, much of which the horror elements come in the absence of adults and authority. Other such films revolving around teenage characters are horrors such as Cabin in the Woods and Split, which follow the stereotypical teenager cast defined by classics such as Friday the 13th and Nightmare on Elm Street. They appeal to young audience through relatable characters. It's a constant technique within horror genres of attracting the target demographic. What have you learned about the technologies from the process of constructing this product? I came to many realizations about different aspects of technology while filming this product. While I was proficient in cameras prior to filming, I had not experimented filming in different lighting and the effect it can have and the best way to tackle the issues it presented. This resulted in several reshoots teaching me the importance of taking filming conditions into account when planning. I also developed my knowledge of data handling and the importance of SD cards to transfer footage. Normally all my information transfer takes place electronically, but due to the size of the footage being stored, it was necessary to place it with an SD card. This made transferring footage between my home desktop and school computers difficult, something I had not taken into account. The editing stages proved informative also. I had not undergone a great amount of editing work since my GCSE project, which was even then done cooperatively with my group. The independence and reliance upon my own editing skills led me to enhance and teach myself proficiency in Premiere Pro. I learned to seamlessly cut and thread together different clips or footage upon a timeline and how to best transition between them. I also learned about the importance of sound within a production and how to best capture it using a variety of mics. Despite its relative minimal importance within my own product, which had little sound in it, it was important that the sound evidence was correct. Looking back at your preliminary task, what do you feel you have learned in the progression from it to the full product? My progression between my preliminary task and my final product were exemplar. The main feature setting them apart was me learning the importance of planning and time management. Whereas the preliminary task received little planning, the product received a great deal and can be evident in its quality. Another tool was the essentiality of crew management. In my preliminary, it included 2 students who I frequently interacted with in person, while within my product it was necessary to include upwards of 6 other people at varying times. I have learned effective team management skills and how to best use a crew to their strengths. On a technical basis, I have become much more capable in all elements of production. I have a fairly expert grasp of basic camera mechanics. In my preliminary, we used basic settings, whereas now I have adapted and changed the settings dependent on the shooting conditions of the scene. Further, I have progressed my creative skills and I'm able to visualize my end product through the screenplays and planning I do beforehand.